We're now writing to the state through the React setState method. However, we previously read the state from the store. The React's built-in setState method is usually good enough if you have a very small state and you don't have a lot of actions on this state object. However, when the state gets bigger, it's usually a good idea to manage the state separately from the React application so that you don't have a lot of logic in one React component. And that's exactly what we're going to do because we previously read the state from the store. So the idea is we're going to make this store object responsible for everything state, and the app component will always just read from the store object. So my goal is to move these 3 lines into the store. So we'll comment them out here, and I'll put them in the state API index.js. Set search term. And now this store doesn't have a setState method because, well, this setState method is coming from React. So we'll come back to this part and implement it somehow in the store. But once we have a set search term, we can call it directly here. So basically, instead of all this, we can actually call set search term directly from the store. So this.probs.store.set search term. And this way, the store object is going to be aware of this search term, and I'm not managing the state in the React component at all. So we'll go ahead and implement set search term. So this store manages a data property, and it just returns that property. So I need to set the search term here. So this is super simple. We can just do this .data.search term equals search term. However, once we do that, we have a disconnection between the app component and the store because we are changing the data in the store object. However, the app component reads the state out of the store object only when it gets constructed. So we basically need this React component to update when the store state changes. And we have a few options to do that. But the idea is that we need to subscribe to store changes. And by subscribe, I mean provide the store object a callback to be executed every time that store object changes its data. We can implement this in a lot of ways. So for example, we can make this state API an event emitter. And every time we change the state, we can do something like this, .emit a change event. And we can make the app component add a listener to this change event emitter and invoke a callback then. This is actually the core of the Flux pattern in React applications. If you're just using a vanilla Flux implementation, a Flux store is an event emitter, just like that. However, the simpler choice is how the Redux library does that, which is basically to manage subscription in the same object, and when it's time to notify subscribers, we just loop over them. So this is simple. Let's do that. We'll manage subscribers in a variable on the instance here. Let's just call it subscriptions. And we can manage that with an object. So every time anybody subscribes to the store, we'll just place their subscription on that object. And we're going to need an ID to identify every subscription. So we'll do last subscription ID. And we'll start that with 1. So every time we subscribe a user, we're going to increment that subscription ID. So we basically need 2 methods here on the store object. We first need a subscribe method. So every component that needs to subscribe to the state of this store is going to call this method. So this would be a function, and it receives a callback. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we also need to unsubscribe. So every component that subscribe should also be able to unsubscribe somehow, right? When we unmount the component, we should unsubscribe because this is an active listener. So if the component gets unmounted, we don't want this listener to exist anymore. So subscription is easy. We basically want to add an element to this .subscription. So this .subscription, and we'll use this .last subscription ID. And we just place the callback function on that. So the value for the subscription is just the callback function. So the callback function is what the subscriber is interested to be executed. So basically, when I subscribe to something, I provide a callback function. And that means that I'm interested in your data change. And every time that data changes, you should invoke this callback. So I'm going to go ahead and increment this .last subscription ID for the next one. In fact, let me actually increment it before. so that we get to return the subscription ID. We can start that from 0 so that we have 1 as the first subscription ID, and I'll just return this .last subscription ID. And the reason I'm returning this .last subscription ID is so that I enable the unsubscribed with a subscription ID. So the unsubscribed will have a subscription ID in here, and it will just simply delete this .subscriptions for that subscription ID. Very simple. So to subscribe to this store, you just call the subscribe method with a callback function to be executed when the data changes. And to unsubscribe, when you subscribe, you get a subscription ID, and you can unsubscribe by calling the unsubscribe method with that subscription ID. So let's go ahead and subscribe to this store from the app component. We can do that in component did mount. So basically in component did mount, once we have a component, we'll go ahead and do this .props.store.subscribe, and we want to pass a callback here, right? And this is going to give us a subscription ID, right? So we can actually place that on an instance like that so that we access it in component will unmount. So now in component will unmount, we will just do this .props.store.unsubscribe using this .subscription ID. So this is very simple. We just subscribe to the store, we get back a subscription ID, and when we unmount the component, we just unsubscribe. However, we need to know what to do here. Right in here, what are we going to do? So the app component subscription basically needs to update the component state, the React internal state, every time the store state changes, because we want to keep both of these in sync. So we'll create a new method. We'll call this method onStoreChange. This method is local here, so we can do something like this .setState. And we can read the state from the store. So again, this .props.store.getState, just like that. And we can pass this onStoreChange to the subscribe as a callback. So we'll do this .onStoreChange. So basically what I'm doing here is that I'm expressing interest in the store state, and I'd like the store to execute this callback every time its data changes. This way, the app component's state will be completely in sync with the store's state. So I get to manage the state in a store object externally to the app component, and I get to reflect those changes to the app component to get my React application to update when it needs to. Okay, so now all we need to do to finish this feature is basically to notify all subscribers. So every time a subscriber subscribes, we're going to put them on this subscription object. So when we do any data change like this line, we need to notify all subscribers basically. So let's create a new method here and call this method notify subscribers. And this is a very simple method. We'll basically need to loop over this .subscriptions, which is an object. So we'll simply do object.values, and we get all the callbacks. We want to loop over these callbacks. And for each callback, we'll get access to that callback here. So the value here is the callback. And we want to simply execute that callback, just like that. So loop over all the subscription values, which are callback functions, and for each one of them, just execute it. So now, every time we do a change like that, we want to call notify subscribers, just like that. This .notify subscribers. So I think at this point we can actually test. Let's do that. So we'll re-render the application, make sure we don't see any errors, and try to search. And looks like it's working. Here's what's happening. When I typed the letter here, the state of the store itself has changed. So I can highlight this and inspect it, $props.store.getState, and you'll see that the search term is set on the state of the store. However, my React application rendered because I subscribed to that store. So every time we set the search term, we're going to notify all subscribers. So possibly more than one component is going to subscribe to the same store. So when we do a data change, when we do a state change, we want to notify all subscribers. However, we will probably change more than just the search term on the state. So every time we change the state of the store component here, we need to notify subscribers. So it's probably a good idea to have a method that changes the state and just call that method all the time. So we can, for example, instead of notify subscribers here, and instead of setting the data here, we can think about calling this method. We do something like this dot, maybe I'm going to call it merge with state. And the reason I called it merge with state is because I'm going to pass in this search term just like that. And I want this search term object to be merged with the state that I have originally. And I don't need to call notify subscribers because merge with state is going to do that. So merge with state is a function. This function receives a value. Let's call this value state change. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge it with the state. So we'll do this dot data equal the original data and then my state change, just like that. So basically copy the original data and then merge the state change object that I pass. And after I do that, I can notify subscribers. So now every time I want to do any change, I do it just through this merge with state function that's going to generically do that operation and notify all the subscribers. And this way I'll have just one call to notify subscribers. I don't have to do it every time I do a change to the state, as long as I do the change through the merge with state function. Let's go ahead and test this change as well. Refresh, search for something, and looks like things are working.